Hey guys, my name's Sam and welcome to Paramedic. This week's video, we're discussing the New Orleans attack. So I've had a number of people reach out wanting me to weigh in on the New Orleans terror attack on New Year's Day. If you've been living under a rock, there was an attack where an individual took a truck, drove it down a busy Bourbon Street, and then he got out of his truck and started shooting. So far, there are confirmed 14 people dead and over 30 people in the hospital. Those numbers are going to shift over the next couple of days and weeks when we learn more about what happened. So the first thing I want to talk about is things you can do. I'm not going to watch the video and tell you exactly how to treat these casualties, whatever. It's just not helpful, it's not accurate, and it really is no value add. What I want to talk about instead is the skills that you need to be able to respond to these situations, even if you don't have equipment and gear on you. The first thing is going to be understanding preventable causes of death, and a majority of that is massive hemorrhage. Now, most of these patients probably did not succumb to massive hemorrhage. We're talking about preventable causes of death, not inevitable causes of death if it happens. So, understanding how to use a tourniquet, understanding wound packing, direct pressure, and keeping patients warm is huge. There is a link below to my Stop the Bleed class there. It's on YouTube. It's totally free. It's not like a course I need you to sign up for or anything. But you can go in there and kind of learn a little bit of that skill set to keep those around you alive if the worst were to happen. The next thing you can learn to do is CPR. Now, realistically, in this situation, we have a lot of traumatic cardiac arrests. CPR is probably not going to do you much good. Doing CPR in a patient with massive trauma is almost always inevitable unless they happen to have a medical emergency at the same time the trauma happened that put them into cardiac arrest. Super unlikely. And especially in these mass casualty situations, you are better served going to help somebody else than somebody on the ground, without a pulse. That being said, I do want to make a triage video in the future. If you come across somebody, and they are on their back, you can roll them on their side, clear their airway, stop major bleeding, and then move on to the next patient to give them the best chance possible, even though they'd technically be, a black on the triage tag. Along those same lines, and something that a lot of people don't want to hear, is that one of the most effective things you can do if you ever find yourself in one of these situations, if you are not directly restraining the perpetrator or you don't have a patient to help right there, one of the best things you can do is get out of the area. Don't linger, don't stand in the street and scream, get out of the area, reduce the confusion for incoming responders. And if there's a place to, report to tell, the FBI or whoever what you saw, do that. But in the moment, in the acute setting, get out of the area and get anybody else that you can get out of the area out. It's just going to make everybody's lives a lot easier. Now, if you're caring for somebody, like I just said, obviously you can stay by their side and help them as needed. So the next part of this video, I want to talk a little bit more realities of these situations. And a lot of this comes from my bachelor's degree in Homeland Security and Emergency Management, because what those classes consisted of a lot is just kind of what our failures are in security in the United States and even on a global scale. So a lot of what you see around you for security measures are security theater. It's not to say that they're unnecessary. It's not to say that they don't prevent certain things, but action always beats reaction. And we have these things in place because if we didn't, there'd be a problem, but they're really not stopping bad guys. Those bad guys can look at everything we have in place and decide how they're going to respond. A good example is actually this Bourbon Street incident, where the bad guy, even though there were 300 police officers down there, even though there were big heavy garbage trucks guarding certain entrances, there were police officers at other entrances, there were cement pylons to keep people out. Now, some of those were a little bit wonky on their infrastructure and they were set to be replaced. We like to find things to blame. That's going to be one of the big pitfalls here, but ultimately there are going to be little things like that in every situation. And despite all of that, despite the quick response force, despite overhead sniper teams looking for, or counter sniper teams looking for bad guys in the crowd, we still had a gentleman that was able to cause a lot of destruction there. And honestly, it's not an indictment of New Orleans PD. I'm sure there were mistakes made, but You know, we all saw that video where the cops get that radio transmission or they heard something going down the street and they sprint towards it. People did what they were supposed to do and they put the bad guy down very quickly after he exited the truck. Even so, like I just said, he killed a lot of people. So that kind of drives home why you need to be prepared, even in situations that have an incredibly fast response rate, even in areas that have a lot of ambulances, a lot of medical infrastructure. It still is beneficial to have the skills to stop major bleeding and save lives around you before somebody else can get there. Remember, it takes less than 4 minutes to bleed out of your femoral artery, and I guarantee you patients were not seen right in 4 minutes, even with all of that infrastructure in place. You know, one other thing I want to talk about here is that, you know, during the Vegas shooting and that very same weekend, there was a concert going on in Boone, Iowa, population like 10,000, that had the exact same attendance as the concert going on in Vegas. And right now we've been very lucky that these attacks have only been perpetuated in large metro areas that have a robust response network. You know, I don't know how many rigs New Orleans fields, but I bet you it's a absolute crap ton. There. And, you know, New York City, same thing. We saw a shooting there and they have a ton of ambulances, hundreds of ambulances that they can send to the problem. Boone, Iowa, that hospital staffs 1 to 2 rigs at most. And then you're going out of county and you're getting, you know, maybe 20 ambulances in an hour's time. And it's just not the same thing. So you can still have these big gatherings. Tragedy can still strike in rural areas. So just because you don't live in one of these metropolises doesn't mean this can't happen to you. And it's just one more reason to be prepared and understand the limitations around you. Ultimately, my goal is not to scare you. This is a scary topic. This is a scary thing that happened. But you should not be getting into preparedness just out of fear. You should be getting into preparedness out of a healthy respect for the risks around you. It is incredibly rare to experience an event of mass violence. I've been in EMS for over 10 years. I've responded to a couple mass casualties, but I have never responded to a scene of mass violence. And I'm somebody that would be called from in a pretty large geographic area to go to something like that. And if I haven't seen it, it's even more unlikely that you will see it, despite how prevalent it appears on the news. Remember what our population is in the United States. This is still a very rare event, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be ready to respond if something like this happens around you. And the really cool thing about, you know, learning Stop the Bleed and CPR is that it works in any situation. So just because you're ready to respond if it's a mass violent incident, you can still go respond for the motorcycle rider that happened to crash in front of you and cut off his leg. You can help that construction worker, you know, that fell through, you know, a pane of glass or something like that. So just because we're talking about this in the context of extreme violence doesn't mean it doesn't apply in other places. I'd love to know your guys' perspective on this and the things I've said today. Leave them in the comments down below, and I will see you next week.